So in terms of internet uses, we have different ways of using kind of computers. And there's essentially 5 different ways that we use a computer to do a job for us, you know. So we might use it for sort of, transacting, communicating, storing information, being entertained, or finding information. We use it for problem solving as well, but that might be sort of, something that you might use a website for. Okay. But in terms of sort of like, so the activities we do on the internet mean that there may be sort of different risks attached to those sort of uses. So if you're transacting, you might mean that you're shopping or banking, which is potentially a higher risk than, say, like just looking up something online, finding out a piece of information about when the bins are being sort of picked up from the council or something, or trying to find out the name of a book or a film or something. Yeah. So there's a hierarchy of risk, if you like. What I'm trying to do here is look at possibly the way we might assess our individual risk. Okay. And so you can see this column on the right looks at the overall risk, and it looks at a thing called the digital profile. So our digital profile is how easy we stand out on the internet. How big a target are we perceived to be in terms of criminals? Yeah. And I've tried to simplify that by kind of saying, right, our perceived visibility online is V, multiplied by our perceived target value. So for instance, if I was kind of like seen as a director of a technology company and highly visible, even though I might be as poor as a church mouse, I might be potentially sort of seen as a rich target. Potentially. It might be that, people kind of see you and they think, right, let's try and find out some information about this guy and see where we can, what kind of accounts he might have, what sort of things he does, try and send things like find an email address, send an email inviting him to do some course, or inviting him to being part of a conference on technology or something that he would be interested in, or offer to send him a report saying, guess what, we found out this, I'm sure your firm will be interested in this. Click on the link and bang, they've got me. A piece of malware comes onto my computer. Yeah. So it means that your potential risk to something like, say, a phishing scam goes up according to your digital profile. And so when I look at the kind of the other elements on the form, so the overall account risk is these kind of N divided by PS. And so what I've put there is the number of accounts I might have online divided by my password strength and where I actually store the passwords. So for instance, if I store them on my computer in a Word document, it means that they could easily be accessed if someone managed to compromise my network. They could get all my passwords by just copying that Word document. Yeah. But if they're encrypted on a document, they wouldn't be able to do that. If I'd write them down on a piece of paper in the house, if the house gets burgled and that piece of paper gets nicked, they've got all my account passwords. Yeah. If I save them onto my computer, on a laptop computer, or on my phone, could my phone be hacked and all the passwords be nicked? Yeah. So the kind of the probability of getting into an account could be seen as N over PS. Those two factors. Exactly. So yeah, it might not be your fault, but some other service account that you've got gets hacked. And you were sort of saying about Virgin Media recently, Facebook's been hacked, Yahoo's been hacked, lots of places have been hacked. And so it's important to know whether you've got a data breach. So for instance, how many accounts have I got where data has been breached, and what data has been on there I'd represent as D, yeah? And so that all multiplies the amount of account risk immediately, yeah? Now, the other idea might be, so if someone could actually get in and compromise an account and take it over, I've kind of divided that by the amount of recovery options. So for instance, if someone gets a password, do I have a backup email or a text or some way of recovering an account that's been hacked into? So that's so I've divided that by. So essentially, we've got the overall account risk is about passwords, about number of data breaches that might have happened, divided by my different recovery options. Right, so it's work in progress, but it's an algorithm. So you know it kind of needs data to perhaps sort of test it would be the next thing, wouldn't it? To come up with like a number system, develop a little questionnaire, test it, see what people's profiles look like here about web browsing and how we might use our devices. So it's some more formulas really, folks. This one. Down the left hand side are the factors, and so it's a bit like you know, if something's dependent on something else, you kind of multiply the probability by it, sort of thing. So for instance, you know, like we've got the amount of time you might spend online multiplied by the number of devices you use, and the kind of activities you use, this kind of activity mix. So I said, for instance, are we using our devices to transact doing banking stuff or communicating or just storing information, or are we using it just for finding out information? So it kind of drops down with that activity mix. So in a way, the time spent needs to be looked at in terms of your balance of activity. And the other factors that would kind of affect how we sort of browsing would be the networks that we use. So for instance, if we're using a home network and we've done the right things to our network box, as Douglas suggesting that we did, the risks of you being compromised become very, very low. However, if we take our devices down the library and we log on to the library, which is an open system, our risk then goes up. So it's thinking about the number of networks that we might use and the type of behaviours we might use and how much we might use. So, you know, if we don't have an internet connection at home, we rely entirely on using networks out of the house in cafes and pubs and so on. It presents a different set of risks than it would if you're just doing everything at home. Software sort of utilised. So here I'm thinking about the kind of operating systems, the age of it and the systems that we use, and what kind of third-party apps we might be using. So again,
the third-party apps, sorry, going to interrupt, will depend on whether you actually download them from sort of authorized places, wouldn't it, or are you unauthorized places?
Yeah, that's right. So I think you're right. So for instance, you know, if you're using, say, some open source things, does it have the same reputation that perhaps, say, you know, Microsoft does or an Apple product has? So, you know, all our behaviors are different, you know, but we can limit our risk by adopting different behaviors. That's what it's saying, isn't it? Okay. So the other aspect, what sort of websites are we visiting and how secure are they? So I've kind of called it, the number of websites might be sort of say W, R might be to do with website reputations. So you know, again, are we using kind of like named brands that have got a good reputation? Are we using things that are more obscure that we don't know a lot about? And what are our behaving habits around that? Right, okay, right. So anyway, the last point is really about downloading files, because sometimes we kind of do things like download pictures, you know, soundtracks, videos, all sorts of things like that, you know. So I mean, you know, those again are potential risks because there may be embedded sort of code in them. For instance, if we download, say, some software, we kind of sometimes get things like, you know, things that are called like SHA code, and it's like a little checksum number code. You get a data because it's a very useful sort of piece of free software. There's often a lot of clone sites that kind of dish up downloads, and so they actually dish up malware attached to that executable file. And so what they do is that you can get this SHA file, which gives you a long hexadecimal number that you check against the size of the file. so that you can, you know, so if there's any extra code embedded into it, you know that it's got malware in it. So, you know, there are issues with some of the downloads, and you know, and because it's a hex file, you know, it's an executable. They're quite hard to pick up in terms of virus. You know, viruses being embedded in them, and the way that it probably does the virus checkers work is they're checking these SHA codes to make sure it's exactly the right number of bits long, not too short, not too long. Yeah. Right. So downloading is potentially quite risky.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if the reason that I put a 1+ LN there is to sort of so that we don't get a 0 in the factoring, so that if you do no downloading, it just keeps your risk browsing behavior as all the other elements. But as soon as you start downloading, it ups that risk, and that's why the value of LN has to be some kind of scale again, like you were saying at the beginning, Alan. You know, we need to say, well, if you download, say, you know, once every, you know, blue moon, you know, say maybe twice or 3 times a year, or are you downloading maybe, you know, several times a month or several times a week? You know, it's potentially increasing that risk enormously. Yeah.
Yeah, understand. Yeah.
Okay, and then I've kind of things like encryption protocols. So I've kind of divided encryption protocols here because when we look at web pages, sometimes they are insecure. So it's hypertext HTTP.
Yeah.
You know, the hypertext markup language is kind of insecure, so it's unencrypted, the connection between yourself and a particular website. Whereas HTTPS is an encrypted link to that particular website. Most reputable sites have secure certificates on these days. They're called SSL certificates. Yeah. So those that you don't, potentially they can kind of get your kind of thing, any information that you transact with that particular website can be intercepted otherwise if it's not encrypted. So that's another factor on the sites that we visit. Are they actually secure sites? And when we're using shopping sites, we look at the things like the lock and the security certificates to make sure that if we're spending money on that site, that it's secure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got another sort of potential kind of algorithm here for browsing behavior, and we've got an algorithm for our accounts. Yeah.